Captain Sarah Rodriguez was a Marine through and through, a fact etched into her sharp, intelligent eyes and the way she held herself, always ready. She wasn't just another officer. She was a decorated leader, known for her sharp mind in a firefight and a resolve that never seemed to waver. People talked about her tactical brilliance, how she could see patterns in chaos, and how she never gave up, no matter the odds. Right now, she was deep in the heart of Baghdad, leading a small reconnaissance unit. It was 2006, and the Iraq War was in a critical, brutal phase. Her mission was simple on paper, but deadly in reality: gather intelligence on insurgent movements. They were operating in a sector known for being particularly nasty, a place where every shadow could hide a threat. Baghdad in 2006 wasn't a place for sightseeing. It was a city scarred by conflict, a constant low-level hum of danger that could erupt into violence at any moment. Every patrol was a gamble. Improvised explosive devices, or IEDs, were a daily terror, hidden in plain sight, waiting to tear through vehicles and lives. Sniper fire was a constant threat. A sudden crack and a bullet from an unseen window. This was urban warfare at its most unforgiving. The specific sector they were in was a maze, a labyrinth of narrow streets, crumbling buildings, and crowded markets. It was a perfect hunting ground for insurgents, ideal for ambushes and the brutal close-quarters fighting of guerrilla tactics. Rodriguez's unit moved with a practiced, almost silent caution. Every Marine knew the drill. Eyes open, ears peeled, weapons ready. They were methodical, checking every alleyway, every rooftop, acutely aware that one wrong step could mean everything. As they pushed deeper, a subtle unease began to settle over Sarah. It wasn't anything she could pinpoint immediately, just a feeling, a prickle on the back of her neck that she'd learned to trust over years of combat. There was an unusual quietness to this part of the city, too quiet for the usual bustle. Civilians, usually a constant presence, seemed to be gone, or at least keeping out of sight. That was a bad sign. She noticed strange markings on some walls, symbols she didn't recognize but that felt out of place, like a warning only meant for those who knew how to read it. Her instincts, honed by countless patrols and skirmishes, were screaming at her. Something was off. One of her younger Marines, Miller, pointed to a discarded tire in the middle of a deserted street. "Captain, think that's anything?" he asked, his voice low. Sarah glanced at it, then quickly scanned the rooftops. "Probably nothing. Miller, just keep moving, stay alert." But her gut told her differently. She'd seen too many nothing things turn into deadly traps. A moment later, as they rounded a corner, she caught a fleeting glimpse of movement on a distant rooftop, a shadow that disappeared before she could properly focus. It was probably just the light, or a bird, her logical mind told her. But her instincts flagged it, filed it away. When you're in a place like this, you learn not to dismiss anything, no matter how small. That fleeting observation, that unusual quiet, the displaced civilians, they were all tiny pieces of a puzzle she hadn't quite put together. But the picture forming in her mind was grim. The calm, she knew, was just a prelude. The storm was coming. The storm hit with brutal, sudden force. One moment, the street was quiet, the air thick with tension, and the next, hell exploded around them. A deafening blast ripped through the air, sending a geyser of dust and debris skyward as the lead Humvee buckled and flipped. Before the echoes of the explosion had even faded, a torrent of small arms fire erupted from every conceivable direction. Rooftops, windows, alleyways. It seemed like the entire sector had come alive with enemy fighters. The unit was caught completely off guard, trapped in a deadly crossfire. Chaos reigned for a heartbeat. Screams mixed with the crackle of gunfire and the guttural shouts of unseen attackers. Sarah saw Miller, the young Marine who had pointed out the tire, fall, a dark stain blossoming on his uniform. Another Marine, Johnson, was thrown clear of the mangled Humvee, lying still amidst the wreckage. The initial moments were a blur of smoke, noise, and pain. But even in the pandemonium, Sarah's training kicked in. Her voice, sharp and clear, cut through the din. Cover! Return fire! Suppress that rooftop! She barked, her rifle already spitting rounds towards a group of insurgents on a nearby building. She moved with a practiced fluidity, dropping to one knee, assessing the unfolding nightmare in seconds. She pointed, she yelled orders, she fired. Her Marines, despite the shock and initial losses, responded, their own weapons joining the cacophony. They were taking heavy fire, but they were fighting back. Then came the chilling realization. "Captain, radio's dead," Sergeant Davies yelled, trying to get a signal from his comms unit. But all he got was static, a harsh, unforgiving hiss. The primary communication lines were either jammed by the sheer volume of enemy activity or, more likely, had been destroyed in the initial blast. They were cut off. No backup, no air support, no way to call for extraction. The gravity of the situation settled like a lead weight. A small, isolated unit, deep behind enemy lines, surrounded by a superior, determined enemy force. They were alone. Sarah knew they couldn't stay in the open street. It was a death trap. Her eyes darted around, searching for anything that offered even a shred of cover, a place they could make a stand. Her gaze landed on a partially destroyed building, its facade crumbling, but still offering a semblance of protection. "That building! Move! Now!" she commanded, laying down suppressive fire as her remaining Marines scrambled towards it, dragging their wounded and fallen comrades. The dash was perilous, bullets kicking up dust around their feet. But they made it, diving into the relative safety of the building's interior. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of old concrete. Sarah immediately set about establishing a defensive position. "Davies, barricade that entrance. Lopez, cover that window. 2-man teams, sector by sector. Don't bunch up," she ordered, her voice firm, unwavering. They used whatever they could find, overturned tables, chunks of rubble, even a broken door, to block the main entrance. Firing positions were quickly identified, fields of fire established. Every Marine knew their role, their movements efficient and precise, born of countless hours of training and real-world combat. As they worked, the grim reality of their dwindling resources became starkly clear. Ammunition was already a concern. They had burned through a lot in the initial ambush. Water supplies were limited. A few canteens passed between the thirsty men. Medical supplies were even scarcer, just a few first aid kits for their wounded. Johnson, the Marine thrown from the Humvee, was bleeding heavily, and their medic, Doc Ramirez, worked frantically under the dim light, trying to stabilize him. Sarah watched, her jaw tight. This wasn't just a firefight anymore. This was a siege, and it was only just beginning. The first night's fury descended upon them like a physical weight, a relentless barrage of enemy assaults that tested every fiber of their being. From all angles, the insurgents launched continuous waves of attacks, probing their defenses, trying to find a weakness, a crack in their resolve. Explosions rocked the makeshift stronghold, sending dust and debris raining down. Small arms fire rattled against the walls, creating a constant, terrifying symphony of violence. Each wave felt stronger, more determined than the last, pushing the Marines to their absolute limits. The psychological toll was immense. Exhaustion gnawed at them, a deep, bone-weary fatigue that threatened to drag them under. Fear, a cold, creeping sensation, was a constant companion, but it was met with a grim, unyielding determination. No one spoke of giving up. No one even hinted at surrender. Sarah Rodriguez, despite the crushing pressure, remained a pillar of strength. Her voice, though hoarse from shouting orders, never wavered. She moved from position to position, a ghost in the shadows, checking on her Marines, offering a word of encouragement here, a sharp command there. She was making critical tactical decisions under fire, adapting their defenses as the enemy changed their approach, always one step ahead. Resource management became a brutal necessity. Ammunition was rationed with extreme prejudice. Every round counted. "Short, controlled bursts. Make every shot matter," Sarah barked, her eyes scanning the perimeter. Water, precious and dwindling, was distributed in sips, just enough to wet parched throats. Doc Ramirez, his face streaked with grime and sweat, meticulously managed the meager medical supplies, prioritizing the most critical injuries. Johnson, the Marine thrown from the Humvee, was stable for now, but his condition was precarious. Other Marines had shrapnel wounds, bullet grazes, and concussions. They patched each other up as best they could, using strips of cloth for bandages and whatever clean water they had left to clean wounds. Improvisation became key to their survival. Damaged equipment was repurposed. A broken antenna became a makeshift prop for a barricade. Empty ammo cans were filled with rubble to create additional barriers. They even fashioned crude tripwires with loose wires and debris, hoping to slow down any insurgents who managed to breach their outer defenses. Every Marine contributed, their minds sharp, finding solutions in the face of overwhelming odds. There were glimmers of hope amidst the despair. Small victories, hard won and celebrated with a silent nod or a brief, tired smile. They repelled an attack where a dozen insurgents tried to rush the main entrance, their coordinated fire cutting them down. Lopez, with a well-aimed shot, took down a sniper who had been harassing them from a distant rooftop. These moments, fleeting as they were, fueled their resolve. They proved they could still fight, still hurt the enemy. But the growing realization of their predicament was a heavy burden. The sheer numbers against them were terrifying. Every insurgent they took down seemed to be replaced by two more. The fight felt endless, a grinding, attritional battle they couldn't possibly win in the long run. Sarah, despite her outward calm, felt the weight of it all. She maintained a facade of strength, knowing her Marines looked to her for leadership, for hope. But inside, she wrestled with the overwhelming odds, the desperate reality of their situation. She allowed herself only brief moments of internal struggle, pushing down the fear, the doubt, the crushing responsibility for the lives under her command. Her focus had to remain on the next move, the next defense, the next minute of survival. The night was long, and dawn seemed an impossible dream. The relentless assaults of the first night had shown Sarah Rodriguez one grim truth. Conventional defense, hunkering down and waiting, was a suicide mission. They were too few, their resources too thin, their enemy too many and too determined. A strategic shift was not just an option, it was their only chance. She had to make them unpredictable, a phantom force that the enemy couldn't pin down. This was how the ghost tactic was born. The urban environment, once a death trap, would now become their ally. The labyrinthine streets, the collapsed buildings, the piles of rubble. These weren't just obstacles. They were tools. Sarah started by creating illusions of movement. A Marine would fire a burst from one window, then quickly move to another, firing again, making it sound like multiple positions were active. They set up crude booby traps that would go off with a loud bang, drawing enemy fire to empty sections of the building. The idea was to make the insurgents believe there were more Marines than there actually were, to sow confusion and fear. They began a brutal and effective form of psychological warfare. Instead of passively defending, they initiated brief, surgical strikes. Under the cover of darkness and the chaos of the ongoing siege, small teams, often just 2 or 3 Marines, would slip out. They would hit a weak point in the enemy's perimeter, a poorly guarded alleyway, a sniper position that had become too comfortable. They'd fire a few well-placed shots, maybe toss a grenade, and then vanish back into the shadows. These weren't sustained engagements. They were quick, brutal jabs designed to inflict damage and then disappear, leaving the enemy scrambling to figure out what had just happened. Moving unseen became an art form. The Marines, already experts in urban warfare, now embraced the shadows and debris as their natural habitat. They moved through narrow gaps between buildings, crawled through shattered windows, and used the cover of collapsed walls. Their movements were fluid, silent, almost like ghosts themselves. One moment, an insurgent patrol would be moving confidently down a street. The next, a burst of gunfire would erupt from an unseen position, taking down a few of their comrades, and then silence would fall again, leaving them looking wildly around for an enemy that seemed to have materialized from thin air. These hit-and-run tactics began to disrupt the enemy patrols. The insurgents, who had initially been so confident in their overwhelming numbers, started to become hesitant. They moved more slowly, constantly looking over their shoulders. The coordinated attacks they had launched on the first night began to falter, replaced by smaller, more cautious probes. The Marines, though still outnumbered, were dictating the pace of the battle, forcing the enemy to react to them. The effect on the insurgents was palpable. Their initial confidence gave way to growing anger and desperation. They couldn't understand how such a small unit, seemingly surrounded, could still be striking at them. The frustration mounted with every failed attempt to pin down the elusive Marines. They would mass their forces for an assault on what they thought was a fixed position, only to find it empty or to be ambushed from an unexpected direction. Misinformation and paranoia began to spread through their ranks. Whispers started about the Ghost of Baghdad, a legendary figure, or perhaps a supernatural entity, that was protecting the Americans. The enemy began to see phantoms in every shadow, to hesitate before every turn. The siege, which had started as a physical assault, was rapidly becoming a psychological battle. Sarah Rodriguez understood this. She knew that if they could break the enemy's will, even for a moment, it would be their greatest weapon. They were turning their weakness into strength, using the enemy's fear against them. The fight was far from over, but the ghost was now playing its gambit, and the insurgents were starting to feel its chilling effect. The second day brought an escalation of enemy tactics that confirmed Sarah's suspicions. The insurgents, now thoroughly frustrated by the elusive ghost, abandoned their attempts at psychological warfare and brought in heavier weaponry. The crackle of small arms fire was now punctuated by the concussive blasts of RPGs and the thud of incoming mortars. They weren't just trying to flush them out anymore, they were trying to obliterate them. Buildings that had offered flimsy cover on the first day were now crumbling under sustained barrages, sending dust and debris raining down on the Marines. The brutality of the attacks increased. There were desperate, almost suicidal charges towards their positions. Wave after wave of fighters, seemingly unconcerned with their own casualties. The enemy was clearly under orders to eliminate the Marines at any cost, to wipe out the ghost that was sowing so much fear in their ranks. This relentless pressure took a massive physical toll. The Marines were severely fatigued, their bodies aching from 2 days of non-stop combat and minimal rest. Injuries, some minor, some more serious, were worsening due to the lack of proper medical care and the constant strain. Bandages were grimy, makeshift splints were holding, but just barely. Every movement was an effort, every breath shallow. There were several moments where the enemy came perilously close to breaking through. One morning, an RPG blast tore a hole in what they thought was a secure wall, sending insurgents pouring through. It turned into a close-quarters, hand-to-hand fight, a brutal melee in the dust and smoke. Marines fought with their rifles, their bayonets, their fists, pushing back against the tide. In another instance, a sniper managed to pin down a fire team, and it took a heroic act from a young corporal who exposed himself to draw fire, allowing his comrades to reposition and take out the threat. These acts of individual bravery were constant, born out of a desperate need to protect their brothers and sisters in arms. Sarah was always in the thick of it. She wasn't just directing from a safe distance, she was leading by example. She fired her rifle with grim precision, helped carry wounded Marines to safer spots, and shouted encouragement that cut through the din of battle. Her presence was a constant source of inspiration. When she took down an insurgent who had breached their perimeter, her decisive action seemed to galvanize the others, reminding them that their captain was right there with them, fighting for every inch of ground. She was covered in dust, sweat, and grime, her face streaked with dirt, but her eyes held an unyielding defiance. As the second day wore on, the silence from command became deafening. Every time a Marine checked the radio, hoping for a crackle of static, they were met with nothing but dead air. It reinforced their isolation, the chilling realization that they were truly alone. The initial belief that help was coming, that their distress call had surely reached someone, began to dwindle. It was replaced by a grim acceptance. They were on their own. Each passing hour without contact chipped away at their hope, leaving them to rely solely on each other. Despite the fading hope of rescue, Sarah's resolve remained unwavering. She refused to surrender, refused to entertain the thought of giving up. She saw the despair creeping into the eyes of her Marines, and she fought it with every fiber of her being. She spoke in low, steady tones, reminding them of their training, of their duty, of the fact that they were Marines. She knew that if she faltered, even for a moment, the entire unit might break. So she stood tall, a beacon of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds, ready for whatever the second night and the coming third day would throw at them. The silence from command had been a heavy weight, but Sarah knew they couldn't just wait for a miracle. They had to make their own. The damaged radio, a mangled mess of wires and shattered plastic, became their focus. Corporal Miller, a young, quiet Marine with an uncanny knack for electronics, spent hours hunched over it, his brow furrowed in concentration. He salvaged parts from other destroyed equipment, meticulously stripping wires, testing circuits, his fingers nimble and precise. It was a desperate attempt to signal, a long shot, but it was their only shot. The biggest challenge was getting a clear line of sight, a high point from which to transmit. The building they occupied, while offering some defense, was surrounded by taller, more intact structures controlled by the enemy. Specialist Chen, a fearless and agile Marine, volunteered for the perilous climb. He scaled the crumbling facade of an adjacent building under the cover of darkness, a makeshift antenna fashioned from a tent pole strapped to his back. Every creak of the old concrete, every loose stone, sounded like a thunderclap in the oppressive silence. It was a risky venture, a solitary figure against the night sky, a potential target for any insurgent patrol. But Chen moved with the stealth of a shadow, driven by the desperate hope of reaching out. From his precarious perch, Chen managed to rig the antenna. Back inside, Miller worked feverishly, his face illuminated by the faint glow of a headlamp. Hours crawled by, punctuated only by the distant sounds of the city and the closer, more immediate threat of insurgent movement. Then, a miracle. A faint, distorted crackle broke through the static. It was barely audible, a ghost of a sound. But it was there. Miller adjusted a dial, his breath held, and then a voice. It was distant, almost inaudible, but unmistakably American. Lima 19er, this is, repeat, Lima 19er, do you copy? Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline, a jolt of pure, unadulterated hope. She grabbed the microphone from Miller, her voice hoarse but steady. This is Ghost Actual, we copy. We are at coordinates 037 Bravo 9er. Repeat, 037 Bravo 9er. Taking heavy contact. Request immediate extraction. The communication was fragile, breaking in and out, but the message was sent. The voice on the other end confirmed their location, a glimmer of hope, but still no guarantee of immediate rescue. The voice was cautious, logistical, but the fact that someone knew they were alive, that their signal had reached friendly lines, infused the exhausted Marines with a renewed sense of purpose. They weren't forgotten. However, the faint signal had not gone unnoticed by the enemy. The insurgents, already frustrated by the ghost tactics, now sensed a shift. Their leadership, more organized than Sarah had initially given them credit for, understood the implication of a radio transmission. They knew if the Marines were signaling, rescue might be on its way. This realization doubled down on their efforts. The siege intensified, transforming into a desperate race against time. The insurgents wanted to eliminate the Marines before any potential rescue could arrive. The heaviest attacks yet began to fall upon their makeshift stronghold. RPGs slammed into the building with terrifying force, tearing away more of the already damaged structure. Mortar rounds rained down, shaking the ground and sending debris flying. Sniper fire became more relentless, targeting any visible movement. It was a final, brutal push, a last-ditch effort to overwhelm the small, isolated unit. Sarah knew this was it. This was the moment they had been preparing for, the ultimate test of their endurance and their will to survive. They had fought for 2 days and 2 nights, and now, with the faint hope of rescue hanging in the balance, they had to fight harder than ever before. The enemy was coming, and they were coming for blood. The Marines were at their absolute limit. Exhaustion clung to them like a heavy shroud, each movement an effort, each breath a struggle. Critical injuries, bandaged hastily and rebandaged countless times, festered beneath their uniforms. Ammunition was almost gone, counted and recounted, every bullet a precious commodity. Sarah looked at their faces, streaked with dirt and fatigue, eyes burning with a desperate defiance. She knew what she had to do. She stood before them, her own body aching, her voice hoarse from shouting orders for the past 2 days, but her gaze was unwavering. This wasn't a time for false hope or sugarcoating. This was the final stand. "All right, listen up," she began, her voice cutting through the din of distant explosions. "They know we called for help. They're throwing everything they have at us now. They want to finish this before anyone gets here." She paused, letting her words sink in. "We're almost out of everything, but we are Marines. We don't break. We don't surrender. We hold this position until our last breath, until the very last round." A ripple of grim determination went through the small group. There were no cheers, no shouts of bravado, just a quiet, resolute nod from each man and woman. They understood. This was it. This was their final act, their last, desperate defense. They moved to their positions, checking their nearly empty magazines, fixing bayonets, preparing for the inevitable. Every Marine fought with everything they had left, fueled by a primal will to survive, by the unshakable bond they shared. The building groaned under the renewed assault, chunks of concrete raining down as explosions rocked their makeshift fortress. The air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Then, through the chaos, a new sound began to emerge. It was faint at first, barely discernible over the close-range gunfire and explosions. A distant rumble. Sarah paused, straining her ears, her heart pounding in her chest. Was it just the enemy bringing in more heavy vehicles? Or was it something else? The rumble grew louder, more distinct, not the heavy, uneven thrum of insurgent trucks, but a steady, powerful throb. Then, the unmistakable sound of powerful engines growing rapidly closer. And then, the whir of rotor blades slicing through the air. Disbelief warred with a sudden, overwhelming wave of relief. It couldn't be. Could it? Just as the thought formed, the sky above them was filled with the deafening roar of a helicopter. Not an insurgent helicopter, but an American one. A UH-60 Blackhawk, its dark silhouette a beacon of hope against the pre-dawn sky. Simultaneously, the sounds of heavy machine gun fire erupted from the perimeter, but this time, it was different. It was the distinct, rhythmic thud of M250 caliber machine guns, followed by the familiar crackle of M4 carbines. Friendly fire. The breaking of the siege was swift and brutal. Coalition forces, responding to their distress call, engaged the insurgents with overwhelming force. The Blackhawk provided air support, raking enemy positions with its door guns. Armored vehicles rolled into the sector, their heavy weapons tearing through the insurgent lines. The pressure on Sarah's position immediately lessened, replaced by the sounds of a larger, more organized battle outside their walls. The enemy, caught between the besieged Marines and the arriving reinforcements, began to falter, their coordinated attacks turning into a panicked rout. When the first American soldiers burst through their barricaded entrance, the emotional reunion was raw and overwhelming. Relief washed over them, bringing with it tears that had been held back for 72 hours. Exhaustion finally claimed some, as Marines collapsed, their bodies giving out now that the immediate threat was gone. Medics rushed in, tending to the wounded, their faces etched with concern. Sarah, despite her own profound weariness, remained stoic. Her first priority was her remaining Marines. She moved among them, checking on each one, offering a quiet word, a reassuring touch. The price paid was heavy. Lives had been lost, bodies broken, and the scars, both visible and invisible, would remain. Only when she was certain her unit was being cared for. When the immediate chaos of the battle subsided into the organized efficiency of a rescue operation, did she allow herself a moment of reflection. She looked at the rising sun, painting the ravaged city in hues of orange and red, a new dawn breaking after a long, dark night. They had survived. The immediate aftermath of the siege was a blur of medical attention and debriefings. Sarah and her remaining Marines were evacuated. Their injuries, both physical and psychological, assessed and treated. The medics worked tirelessly, patching wounds, administering IVs, and offering words of comfort. Despite the chaos, there was an underlying sense of calm, the quiet efficiency of trained professionals doing their jobs. Sarah, still running on pure adrenaline and the sheer will to keep her team safe, found herself giving a detailed account of the 72-hour ordeal. She recounted the ambush, the severed communications, the relentless assaults, and her tactical decisions that had kept them alive. She explained the ghost tactics, how they had used the urban environment to create illusions, disrupting the enemy and turning their psychological warfare against them. The officers listening to her were visibly impressed, their faces shifting from grim understanding to respect. Her bravery and resilience, along with that of her unit, earned official recognition, a testament to their unwavering resolve under unimaginable pressure. The story of the Ghost of Baghdad quickly spread through the ranks. It became a legend, a whispered tale of Marine tenacity, and an example of what a small, determined unit could achieve against overwhelming odds. The unit's actions became a symbol, not just within the Marine Corps, but across all branches of the military, a powerful narrative of survival and defiance. However, the legacy carried a personal cost. The emotional and psychological scars of the siege ran deep. The constant fear, the loss of comrades, the brutal reality of urban warfare. These experiences left an indelible mark on each survivor. Nightmares were common. Moments of quiet reflection often filled with the faces of those they had lost. Yet, from the crucible of that besieged building, an unbreakable camaraderie had been forged. The bonds between the survivors were stronger than steel, a shared understanding that transcended words, born from having faced death together and emerged. Sarah's career trajectory after Baghdad was a testament to her exceptional leadership and tactical brilliance. She continued to serve with distinction, her experiences in that 72-hour siege shaping her approach to every subsequent mission. She rose through the ranks, her insights invaluable in training new recruits and developing strategies for urban combat. She often drew upon the lessons learned from those harrowing days, emphasizing the importance of adaptability, resourcefulness, and the unwavering belief in one's team. For Sarah, the siege was more than just a battle. It was a profound lesson in leadership, courage, and sacrifice. She understood the true meaning of resilience, the human capacity to endure and overcome. Even years later, the enduring memory of the Ghost of Baghdad stayed with her. It wasn't a burden, but a constant reminder of the human spirit's extraordinary ability to persevere under unimaginable pressure. She carried the faces of her fallen Marines in her heart, their sacrifices a constant motivation. The siege had taught her that even in the darkest of times, hope could be found, and that the strength of a team, bound by loyalty and courage, could overcome any obstacle. The Ghost of Baghdad wasn't just a legend. It was a living testament to the indomitable spirit of those who served, and a personal reminder for Captain Sarah Rodriguez of the profound impact of those 72 hours on her life and the lives of her Marines. The experience shaped her, making her the leader she became, forever carrying the courage and sacrifice of her unit.